I'm Bruce Chappelle, and joining me today is Mr. Ron Brewer. It's Saturday, October the 3rd. Mr. Brewer, thank you for being with us today and sharing your memories with us. I suppose we'll start by asking where you were born, what it was like growing up in Carroll County.
Okay. Well, I was born in outside of Westminster at Spring Mills, which is out beyond where the Thomas Bettenhunter cement mixing plant was. It's about a mile past that in the Spring Mills area. And it was the house that I was born in was the old Carroll Farm Dairy milk producing plant where they did bottled milk. And I was actually born in that house in 1941. Wow. So my parents had a little store there and gas pumps out front, and they sold hamburgers and ice cream and things of that nature. And one of the unique things that I remember my mother and father tell me about was that they had this place, and every once in a while they'd hold a dance there or something of that nature. But up in the back of the place was back up where on the old Old Westminster Road, and there was a village up there of the black people at that time. They would call them, and those folks would come down to the back of the store, and they had a back fence up behind the garden area, and they would sit up there on that fence and wait till all the white folks left, and then they would come down into the store, and Mom and Dad would always serve them the food and stuff of that nature. But it just shows you how times have changed.
Absolutely.
That they waited till all the white folks were out, and then they'd go down, and Mom and Dad would take care of them and do that.
Wow. What can you tell me about some of the jobs that you had growing up and some of the work that you got into?
Okay, well, as a kid, living at this place, we were close to the Roop Farm, and as we grew up, I came from a family of 12 kids. Wow. So when there was 12 of us growing up, one of the biggest things that Mom and Dad instilled in us was to go to work and produce some money coming in so we could take care of ourselves along the way. So we worked on the farm until we were old enough to go in town, and when I was about 14, I went to town and worked at the theater, the State and Carroll Theaters in Westminster, which were unique places to live, to work and live around. And Dad had a business in town where he ran the business, the Firestone business in downtown Westminster. It was at 23 East Main Street, and then eventually moved to 25 East Main Street, I believe it was. But at the theater, what was interesting was Mr. Delaney, who owned the theater at that time, he ran both of them. Well, we worked there as kids, and we started out as ticket takers and worked our way through. And he taught us a lot of business aspects of working in a theater. He left us count the money, take care of all the operation of the candy machines and filling candy machines and collecting the money from that and counting it and be responsible for it and turn it over to him. And as a ticket taker, then he would let you go and be a projectionist. And I was taught to be a projectionist by Tommy Dixon. And if you're familiar with Tommy Dixon, Tommy was a projectionist. He did a lot of things around Westminster. But Tommy taught me how to run the projector at the State Theater. And the State Theater was the only theater at that time would let blacks into the theater.
Oh, wow. And
they had to go to the balcony. They couldn't sit down in the regular part of the theater. So it was unique. Tommy Dixon was a black man in there, and he taught me as a young man how to run the projectors. And then I went on, and I ended up being the manager of the State Theater, which was only working on weekends at that time because they would run shows Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And that was it. The Carroll Theater ran 7 days a week. And then I worked up at the Carroll Theater, and we had different experiences up there.
Very neat. So you were talking about, times changing, especially for black folks in that time, and I guess you were working there in the mid-late 50s. You were talking about when you started. What can you remember about things really starting to change, with civil rights and everything in the 60s? How did that affect things around town?
Well, that I remember, and I'm going back to Tommy Dixon's son, Richard, who eventually became the state treasurer of the state of Maryland. But Richard was with the NAACP in the local area, and I remember at a time when they were doing their protesting and stuff, but Richard was sort of laid back in that. He didn't want to get involved with that. And there was other people outside of the town that came in and did the protesting. But the theater changed over very easily. I mean, Mr. Delaney just opened the theater up, and the Baltimore Colts had something to do with that too, because they came to town and did practicing, and they had, you know, black players on the team, and so they came up to the Carroll Theater, and eventually they were just left in and came in fairly peacefully, and I think Westminster worked out that itself. I remember walking Main Street, but I don't remember any serious, you know, problems.
Well, very good. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us concerning your time in Carroll County and your experiences?
Well, I could go back and tell you. I mean, I played ball, and my dad, you know, coming from a family of 12, my father drove, but he worked in town, and he was a manager of the store, so he had to stay in there. But I wanted to play ball, and they were forming a first little league team in Westminster, and I told Dad, I said, I'd like to go play and try out for that team. So, of course, Dad said, well, okay, you can, if you want to, you have to find a way to get in and out town to get there. So he said, I either got out and thumbed my way in the road to get there, or I walked. That was my choices. So I get my little ball uniform after I made the team, and I would, to go to a game, I either thumbed my way into town to get there, or I walked and many a times, and Mr. Lottie, I don't know whether you're down at Lottie's rendering plant. Well, there was a gentleman down there who lived out past us. His name was Dutch Huff, and he went in and out the road all the time, and when he went in and out the road, he always would pick me up. I mean, if I was out there, he would pick me up. But the only thing about him was that Dutch Huff was he was a tobacco chewer. Oh, yeah. He chewed tobacco, and when he chewed tobacco, he didn't care where he spit it. And in his car, I used to crawl in his car sometimes, and I say, man, this man's spitting everywhere. So I eventually got to the point where I didn't really care to ride with him. So I'd see him coming, and I'd duck down behind the bank.
Put your thumb down, right?
Well, I'd duck down behind the bank and lay low, and then wait for somebody else to come and continue to walk. But that was a pretty neat story. And I'm sure that there's a lot of stories around about Dutch Huff and that type of thing. But
well, very neat, very neat. Is there anything else in particular that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'll tell you a family story.
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
Coming from a family of 12, there was older kids, and the older kids, we got to the point when we were about 13, 14 years old, we thought, well, you know, we hear all these other kids saying that they're getting an allowance from their parents and stuff like that. Well, my dad, we went to him, about 4 of us went to him and said, Dad, you know, we're hearing that everybody's other kids are getting an allowance, and we'd like to get an allowance if we could. And he said, well, give me some time to think about it, and I'll see what we can work out. So one of our family traditions was the family always got together on Sunday evening, and we had ice cream, and Mom always baked pies and cakes and stuff like that. So that was every Sunday. That's the way it was around the house. We'd get ice cream and do that. So about a week later, Dad would come to us and he said, well, I've decided I can give you an allowance if you really want it, but we're going to have to give up something else. And he said, we'll have to give up Sunday ice cream. So the 4 of us got together and put our heads together and said, which way do we want to go? And of course, we decided we'd stick with the ice cream and forget about the allowance.
That sounds better to me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mr. Brewer, you wanted to talk also a little bit about the Lions Club and your participation in that. What can you tell us about the Lions Club?
Well, I was born in a family where my dad was a Lion, and I've been asked several times and many times to become a Lion, but I worked night times, and I couldn't get to Lions meetings and didn't feel like I could do the club any good. So after I retired, I decided, okay, I'll go to Russell Mills, and he said, Russell came to me and kept coming to me all the time to be a Lion. So I went to him and said, Russell, I think I'm ready to become a Lion. So about 5 years ago, I became a Westminster Lion from the Westminster Lions Club. And today, I am president of the Westminster Lions Club 5 years later, and it's exactly 50 years from the time my father was president of the Westminster Lions Club.
Really
and I'm proud of our club because this year we got the nonprofit award of the philanthropist of the year for nonprofit, and the club really does a lot of good in the community. We not only do we do eyesight type things for the community, but we do other things for like the hospital and therapeutic riding and a lot of charities around. If we see a charity is in need of something and they don't have the means to do it, we'll go out and support them and help them and do what we can to keep things going.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.